Hello and welcome to this edition of Represent NYC on Manhattan Neighborhood Network. I am New York State Assemblymember Guillermo Linares. The shortage of affordable housing here in New York City has reached a crisis point. Most New Yorkers have little to no options for housing or are put in the position to spend an unacceptably high share of their income just to put a roof over their heads. Here with me to discuss ways to address the housing crisis is Karina Jimenez from the Tenant Support Unit, Jason Wu from the Legal Aid Housing Development Unit, and Tom Honan from Manhattan Legal Services. Thank you for being here today. And as someone who represents the community with the highest number of rent-regulated units in the city of New York, I can attest that this is a real crisis impacting on families. The word homeless used to be something that we would think of people who would see in the sidewalks, but it is a deep crisis where we have families doubling, tripling, and where we have communities with high concentration of low-income families now becoming attractive throughout the city of New York. Northern Manhattan, Washington Heights, Inwood, and Marble Hill, no exception, that I have the honor of representing. And I want to publicly thank the three institutions that you represent for collaborating and working with my office to really serve the families that I represent, and I welcome you to this conversation. I hope it can be useful for those who are listening. And why don't we start off with you, Karina, to explain a little bit what you do, what the nature of the work that you do, really to help tenants who are really facing challenges, being, either harassed or being on the verge of losing their home and being in the street and have nowhere to turn. So I wanted to start the conversation and hopefully we'll take advantage of every moment that we have to inform everyone and to let them know where they can go, how they can get the help that they need with this crisis that is upon us.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me here. The Tenant Support Unit was created last year to connect tenants to city services. We take a proactive approach, engaging tenants through a broad range of outreach tactics. That includes canvassing, community events, partnerships with community groups, elected officials, including your office, and other stakeholders. We connect tenants experiencing housing-related issues with a range of city services, and we ensure and case manage them through every step of the process, making sure that their issues are thoroughly and swiftly resolved and addressed.
I appreciate that. And I can attest to the type of work that you do through my office and many other elected officials, as well as the nonprofit organization helping tenants. Why don't you share with us a little bit of what you do?
Sure. So I work at the Legal Aid Society, and we have the criminal defense practice, juvenile rights practice, and the civil practice. And within the civil practice, there's a range of different housing practices throughout the city in all 5 boroughs. I work in our housing development unit, which focuses on Manhattan, and we do predominantly tenant group representation, and we work with tenants who are experiencing building-wide issues with their landlord, whether it's tenant harassment, landlords refusing to make repairs, landlords saying that the building isn't rent stabilized when it is. And so we deal with a lot of these building-wide issues in the unit that I work for, but there are other housing projects that target certain zip codes that are experiencing the highest rates of homelessness throughout the city, or projects that focus on seniors or veterans. And so at the Legal Aid Society, there's a range of different projects that tries to serve various vulnerable communities throughout New York City.
Thank you so much for, again, the work that you're doing to help us in our neighborhoods. Tom?
So first, thank you, Assemblymember, for inviting us here to join you in this conversation. I work for Manhattan Legal Services, specifically in the tenant rights campaign. We recently received funding to engage in anti-displacement work in specific zip codes that are slated for rezoning. Those zip codes in Manhattan are 10029, 10035, which is East Harlem, and of course 10034, which is Inwood. We're very excited to expand our work into Inwood. We know that there are a lot of folks who are rent regulated there that are being pushed out through a number of different methods by landlords. So we're very excited to work with Assemblymember Linares and other organizers in the neighborhood to expand our work there. We specifically are trying to organize tenant coalitions and tenant associations in buildings to represent building tenants in an entire building, as we believe tenants have a lot more power when they're united. But we also, of course, do eviction defense and affirmative actions to help tenants get repairs.
Well, let me begin with the experience that we've had earlier in the year, and the interaction that we engaged very quickly through my office, through your respective organizations. And we started making appointments because we realized how many people walked through the door in my office, and the bulk of what brought them to the office was the issue of housing. Either they wanted to apply for housing or they were exposed to harassment where they lived. As this increased over time, it became clear that my office needed to refer many cases to some of the nonprofits that focus on helping tenants. But it came a point where we felt that we needed to have experts come to my office, legal experts and people who are advocates of tenants. And so we started on Tuesday. Every Tuesday we would dedicate about 3 hours, and we had to make appointments. We quickly built a waiting list, just to see people who had circumstances of harassment and with their apartments. And now we had to extend it to a second day on Thursday. So my office is open on Tuesday and Thursday on a weekly basis. We make appointments. We still receive a lot of people from from my constituents, but a lot of people, this is number one. And I think part of it, and we should discuss this dimension, has to do, the community has become such an attractive place for people to come because they're being priced out of other neighborhoods where they can afford either lower in Manhattan or other places, or coming from out of the city. And the place to come is Northern Manhattan, my district. You're a few minutes away by train to downtown. You have surrounded by parks. It's a relatively safe community, and it's a diverse community. So everybody wants to come. The landlords know this, and they're looking to really target sometimes the most vulnerable, which are seniors who are fixed income, or low-income families, which is a high percentage in my district. So, this has become a real crisis across the city, but it's impacting tremendously. And the only solution is making sure that we stand up to defend the rights according to the law that tenants have, but also hopefully that there be an investment in creating affordable housing for the level of income that the people living in the neighborhood are at. So let's begin and have a little conversation about perhaps some of the things that you want to highlight, that you want to share with those who are listening, that can be helpful to them, because I'm sure that they're facing, one way or another, a crisis, or they're on the verge of confronting it.
Yeah, so a few things I want to point out is, many tenants, as you mentioned, are unaware of their rights as tenants. And a lot of landlords will take advantage of that. And the first thing we always tell any tenant we encounter is, if you are ever concerned about any of your rights, or are being infringed upon, please call 311 immediately and seek legal service providers. And we are partnered with both offices here as well. And some other things I'd like to point out is, you mentioned that Inwood or Northern Manhattan has one of the largest rent-regulated apartments, or concentration of it. Landlords must provide tenants living in rent-regulated apartments the option to renew their lease, for 1 year or 2 years. In addition, tenants should be aware that the Rent Guidelines Board, made a historic decision this past year, and rent freezes went for 1 year, you won't see an increase in your rent, a 0% increase. If you sign for a 2-year lease, you'll see a 2% increase. And this is something tenants should really take into consideration when signing their leases. A few other things we encounter, especially through your office, is heat and hot water. Landlords must provide heat and hot water for all tenants, and it's something that, it's the little minuscule things that we see are impacting tenants across the board. It must be, there's a certain month, between, I think, May and October, where heat must be on at a certain temperature, 68 degrees. And a lot of tenants are unaware of that. And lastly, which we also encounter a lot through your office from our office hours, is that a lot of tenants come with smaller children under 10 years old, and they have no window guards. It's a law. The landlords must provide window guards if you have a child under 10 years old.
Well, thank you so much. And I think that those are very specific things that families need to be aware. The other thing is, if you don't understand English well, we speak the language that you speak, and the organizations and institutions do so. And when you call 311, you also will be spoken by your own language. That's a policy of the City of New York. So you could. The important thing is to seek the help, either by coming to my office or connecting with one of your organizations and some of the other nonprofits that we have in the community.
Yeah, I would build on what Karina was saying. I think a lot of times tenants don't know what their rights are, and a lot of times they have more rights than they would expect. And so it's important for tenants to know that the landlord can't just evict you. They can't just say, I bought your building, we're a new landlord, and now it's time for you to move because I want to vacate the units and I want to, remodel it and bring in new tenants. You have to leave. And sometimes landlords will do that, especially when there's turnover in ownership, and they'll tell the tenants, we're a new landlord, you have to move. The landlord has to take you to court. There has to be a judicial process in place before the landlord can evict you. They need to get a judgment from the court. And so don't just leave your home. If you're being sued, seek out legal services and see if you have any rights. And a lot of times the rights that you have depend on what type of housing you live in. So a lot of the things that Karina mentioned pertain to people who live in rent-regulated housing. So it's important to find out what kind of housing you live in, whether there's any regulatory agreements with the city or with the state. There may be other protections that you have that maybe you're not aware of, and so you should seek assistance from our office, other housing advocacy offices, and try to find out what additional rights and protections you may have. And same thing if you're in court, you should also seek out a translator if that's what you need. Oftentimes I see unrepresented tenants who are not getting the translation services that they need. I see them sometimes asking the landlord, what did they just say? What did the court attorney just tell me to do? And so it's really important that they seek out the services and resources that are available to them. And one other thing that I would just add is, I'm building off of what Tom was saying earlier, that working as a tenant group really gives you more power. I've represented individuals and families, and I've represented 20, 40 unit tenant associations, and I see the difference in court when I'm negotiating with the other side. And when it's one tenant, the landlord's attorney will not agree to certain things.
Right.
But when we're representing 40 tenants in the building, and does the other side really want to go to trial and really fight it out? And so there's a lot of power that tenants have when they work together, whether they're represented or unrepresented.
Thank you.
Tom.
Now, as Assemblymember mentioned, every Tuesday, our office is sending an attorney to the Assemblymember's office to meet with tenants individually for about 30 minutes to an hour each. So if you live in Inwood and you have any problem with your landlord, or if you have a case, definitely reach out to the Assemblymember's office to set up an appointment with an attorney from our office. I want to discuss, obviously there is an affordability problem in the city. And I want to discuss two concrete ways that we can address and preserve affordable units in Inwood and other places in Manhattan. One issue is rent setting by landlords. If you're in a rent-regulated apartment, the city and the state provide a number of laws that dictate how the landlord can set the legal rent. The landlord cannot charge more than this rent. What landlords are often doing is giving tenants, and what we've seen in Inwood is landlords are offering tenants what are called preferential rents, which is a rent that's lower than the legal rent, and then they're illegally increasing the legal rent. So then when that tenant leaves, they can charge a higher rent, even though they may not have been following the correct laws. Primarily, tenants are the ones who can contest these increases through the courts or through the state agency DHCR. So I urge every tenant who is listening to reach out to DHCR and get what's called a rent registration history, and then bring it to meet with an attorney who can look over the rent registration history to make sure that the landlord is charging you the correct rent and not illegally increasing the legal regulated rent. This is one very important way that we can all work together to preserve affordable units by holding landlords accountable to the rent regulation laws that currently exist. I also want to talk a little bit about succession rights. If you live in an apartment with a family member, and that family member permanently leaves the apartment or tragically passes away, if you've been living with them for 2 years together from the time that they leave the apartment, you can assert succession rights. It's very important to meet with an attorney immediately once they leave and to assert your succession rights as soon as possible. The longer you wait, the more it looks like you're committing fraud, and the courts don't look highly on that, and it makes it more difficult to assert your succession rights.
Well, I'm glad you're highlighting, this. All of you are highlighting these issues, and whether it is the specific tenants that have particular issues, or issues that are impacting many tenants in a given development or a given building, which is often the case, or some of the laws that the property owners and the landlords are using, or the loopholes, let's just say, preferential rent, is something that we're going to have to address urgently. Because it's impacting so many people. And once you sign and you are attracted, you're hooked by the lower rent, and you realize as your lease expires that your rent is going high, you're in the street. And this is happening just by to too many people, and we have to be proactive in letting informing the community and educating the community. So one of the things that I think in this particular case in Northern Manhattan, but I would say we speak for the entire city and neighborhoods that with high concentration of low-income families or fixed-income families and seniors, as my constituents are, it's going to take comprehensive and strategic efforts, bringing, the efforts of government, resources to make sure that we have access to legal representation, and I want to highlight that because one thing that is a huge advantage has always been and is intimidating and brings fear to tenants is that you have some of the best lawyers on your side when you go before a judge, or just the thought of that, is frightening to a family on the verge of, losing their home or their apartment. So we need to be strategic in combining efforts through the nonprofit network that we have. But at the end of the day, the important thing for families and individuals who are affected is to know you're not alone. You call 311 if you have a situation. You could communicate with my office or the office of other electeds in the community. We have a number of organizations in the community throughout Manhattan, I have to say, in neighborhoods that are there to really provide assistance and help you. Also, we have laws that are now punish much harsher those who intimidate and harass tenants. But you have to know your rights, and so you're not alone. And we also need to organize whenever we have an issue that impacts many of the families in the same building, because it may have been, as you said before, sold, and now the new owners think that they can do all that they want, but the law is the law. So I want to, just if you could, just let people know, the things that are there available in very specific ways to make a difference for them. I wanted to highlight that they're not alone. This is a crisis. I know that the most important thing is, are we going to have affordable housing for the level of income that we have? We just turned down, and thank God we didn't have a luxury development that was going to come to Inwood. I opposed it because, it was going to leave out the vast majority of families that are way below, the level of income that that development had. And I believe that when we look at affordability, you have different levels. We have to come up with a formula, and I know part of the answer has to come from the state, but it has to be an effort that brings the industry together, the labor movement together, community mobilizing. Let's build 100% affordable housing. That's what Inwood needs, my district needs, and I think neighborhoods with high concentration of low-income families need as well. So I just want to ask you if there's anything that you'd like to share with those who are listening over what we have so far covered.
Yeah, just to piggyback off of everything, the city has invested $30 million in free legal assistance for tenants facing eviction or harassment in these specific rezoning areas. We partner with your office on a weekly basis, so if anyone needs any help or addressing any sort of tenant issues, we're at your office every Thursday from 10:30 to 3 p.m. We're also partnered with the New York Public Library in Inwood. We're there every Thursday and Saturday as well, afternoon. We also partner with other CBOs in the Northern Manhattan community, as well as elected officials. We're partnered with Inwood Community Services, Inc., which is the largest CBO in the Inwood community. And we're there on a bi-weekly basis, so twice a month, in the afternoon from 3:30 to 6:30 on Fridays. So we are available. We also have our folks, taking a proactive community-driven approach, really canvassing the area. So if you see us and we have HRA badges out, IDs, please approach us. And those are the services we're here to provide for folks. And I can't emphasize that as much. You know, we are available in multiple areas. We are also partnering in the other zip codes Tom mentioned on 10029 and 35, but specifically for Northern Manhattan folks, we are available Thursday, Friday, Saturdays.
Wonderful.
I would just add that we also need to close the loopholes in the rent regulation laws. And so, you know, the next renewal is coming up in a couple of years, but we need to, you know, build the movement and be proactive before the renewal in a couple of years and close the loopholes. And because a lot of the loopholes allow the landlords to increase rents permanently through what's called major capital improvements, or to deregulate apartments permanently and take units out of the affordable housing stock that we have available so far. And so we have to close the loopholes. We have to organize. You know, as I said before, it's really important that people work collectively in their building, talk to your neighbors. If you need assistance, reach out to community-based organizations that do organizing. You can reach out to my office, the Legal Aid Society. We'll go to the buildings and meet with tenants. And so those are things that I think are really important. And it's important for tenants to be proactive because these are their homes and this is their community, and they need to be proactive and make sure that they're tapping into the resources that are available.
Wonderful.
So Manhattan Legal Services represents tenants across all of Manhattan. And we work with community-based tenant organizers to organize buildings and to do our group work. Specifically in Inwood and East Harlem, we're working with the Legal Aid Society on building cases, and we're also working with two community organizing groups, Tenants and Neighbors and UHAB, who are going around and trying to build community coalitions to preserve affordability and to organize buildings. So please reach out to our hotline, respond to the flyers, or reach out to Assemblymember's office to get connected with these services.
Well, appreciate all of your input. And, you know, I would be remiss if I did not mention that both the mayor and the governor, HPD, and all other agencies at the state level, the HDR, the governor has also recognized the importance of supporting tenants and preserving our community. So I want to highlight that. And I want to thank you for sharing so much information that I hope will be helpful. Thank you, Karina Jimenez, Jason Wu, and Tom Honan for being here and sharing their insight. I am Assemblymember Guillermo Linares. Thank you for watching Represent NYC on Manhattan Neighborhood Network.